Hello and welcome to Sensible Transfers with me, JJ Bull, and him,
Jon Mackenzie.
And in today's Sensible Transfers, the last of our short run, we're going to cover a big club who have been in the news recently. Who is it, John, and why?
It is Liverpool, and we are covering Liverpool because we thought, well, they're in the middle of their 2.0 rebuild. They spent a lot of money on central midfielders in the summer, so let's go back and have a look and see how they're doing and maybe suggest some areas where they can improve in the future. But then last week happened.
Of course, Jurgen Klopp announced he's going to leave, and so that puts things a little bit into a confusing state because the players we might have picked might be different for who the next manager is. We don't know who that is, so we don't know what players they should be. So what we're going to try and do is pick one player for each position we think they could improve in, including who should be the long-term replacement for Mo Salah. So let's start with that midfield, because there was a whole midfield rebuild in the summer. Did they finish the build? Do they need something else? What did they bring in?
Yeah, so the players they brought in are Wataru Endo, Ryan Gravenberch, Szoboszlai, and someone else.
Alexis McAllister.
So 4 midfielders. But actually, a lot of those midfielders have very, very similar profiles, I would say. Maybe with the exception of Szoboszlai. But the big question I think that everyone was asking after the summer was, Fabinho is gone. Do Liverpool need that kind of 6 profile, a sort of defensive cover, but also a player who can play as a single pivot in build-up as well? And I think the question is still there whether or not they need that player. I think they personally do, if they're going to play the sort of brand of football that we've seen a lot of elite sides playing. But a lot of the managers that are being talked about as high possibility replacements for Klopp have actually used 2 6s rather than a single pivot in the past.
So would you not, for example, put Alexander-Arnold into this position as cover? Do you think McAllister can't do it? Do you not rate Endo for there already?
I think if you're going to move Alexander-Arnold inside, then there's the possibility that you could then just go with a destroyer profile in that 6 role.
Yeah.
I still think that it removes just a little bit of flexibility for you as a coach to not have the possibility to play a single pivot 6. Because if Alexander-Arnold isn't available, then you're sort of forced to have to invert one of your fullbacks, or then I guess play with a double pivot at the back, which might not be the situation that you would want as a manager. So I think that the opportunity to have a sort of classic physical profile 6 who can also play as a single pivot in build-up just gives a manager a bit more flexibility.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a reason that my first pick for the number 6, if they were to bring someone in, I thought they'd look a different profile from what they have, and someone a bit more destructive, someone who breaks up play, who maybe isn't, not to say he can't play as the pivot role completely, but he's not quite there, but it gives you a different profile of player, especially for someone else coming in as manager. So I went for Cheick Doucouré of Crystal Palace. They've got a lot of good players, Palace, that we're going to try and rob some of, I think, for every single club in Sensible Transfers. But I think that kind of build of profile, someone who can break up play really well, gets into tackles, he tends to stay, not that he's not busy, because Endo's a very busy player, runs about everywhere clearing up things, which helps with Jurgen Klopp's counter-press kind of play particularly. And especially if it was, for example, Xabi Alonso who came in, that's kind of player he likes, is having a counter-press thing that might help. But Doucouré is just a tall, closer to Fabinho type of profile that maybe is where I was thinking there. And that's it. But the other one I thought, if you're trying to just improve the squad, someone who might be on the market possibly is Joshua Kimmich of Bayern Munich. Not quite the same player. Do you think that would work?
Yeah, I guess Kimmich feels a little bit more like the profile of Trent Alexander-Arnold, right? As a sort of inverting fullback who's become a 6.
More of an all-rounder as well, I guess.
Yeah. I like the Cheick Doucouré shout. But I think that the problem I had when I was assessing all of the options for this is that if you're looking for a 6 profile that can do, and look, it's an elite profile, right? You're wanting a really well-rounded profile. The problem is that I don't think on the market right now there are any real standout
Rodri plays for
options.
Man City.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And Tchouaméni plays for Real Madrid. Declan Rice has moved to Arsenal. So the way that I was looking at this is, yes, we could either do what you've done, which is go for a player who sort of fits the profile, but would need to develop in Cheick Doucouré, which I think, it's an option. You could do that. You could bring in someone like Boubacar Kamara as well in the same sort of mould. The other option I think is you could bring in like just a straight up destroyer player and play them alongside Alexander-Arnold. But as we've said, like that's fine if you're going to play Alexander-Arnold inverted. But if your new manager comes in and doesn't invert him and plays him, I don't know, as a wing back or a full back, then you've now just got a defensive profile 6 who might not be used at all. So I'm thinking someone like Polinia, for example, would be a good example of that, right? Absolutely elite, out of possession. Is he going to be good enough to single pivot for Liverpool? Probably not. The other option that I thought was there's a few players who are playing as 8s right now who could potentially, again, be developed as sixes. So Ederson, who's at Atalanta, and Yusuf Fofana, who's at Monaco at the moment. Again, I think, yeah, that might work, but Liverpool need a really standout elite player in this position. Therefore, there's risk attached to that option as well. So I think this is maybe the first time in sensible transfers history, but my pick is going to be no pick. I think Liverpool should wait until a really elite number 6 comes onto the market, and they should then sign that player. They've missed out on Tchouaméni. Then there was rumours that they were involved in trying to bring Tchouaméni to the club. Didn't happen. They probably wanted Declan Rice because all of the elite teams did for this very reason. They're going to have to wait for the next one to pop up, I think.
So to summarise, I have picked Cheikh Doucouré and possibly Joshua Kimmich, and John has selected no players. Our next section is on who could be the long-term replacement to Mo Salah, because one day he will stop playing football. I'm afraid that will happen. And so that's going to be quite a difficult thing to do. Now, if we look at the squad list, we can see that they have quite a few players already that can play these positions. And I wonder whether, John, you thought maybe Harvey Elliott might be the long-term solution, maybe Diogo Jota, Ben Doak might get minutes when he's back from injury even. I liked him in pre-season. Are any of those likely to replace him, or do they need to come up with something different, something elite?
I think the fan base would be pretty miffed if the solution was just given as a young player coming through. That said, Ben Doak I think is very exciting and is definitely one for the future. But I think at the point at which Salah leaves, you need to bring in a marquee signing, just because Salah's been so important for Liverpool. I don't think you can just say, well, we'll recreate him in the aggregate with youth players.
There's very few players that get to like 20 goals and 10 assists a season. They're really hard to find and hard to judge, because Salah was obviously, we knew he had the high potential when he came in, but hadn't worked for him in, Chelsea, and it was very brief, but did well in, I think it was Italy before, wasn't it? And then turned into the superstar he is. Still need the coaching to get there. But if they were to bring in someone, I guess, say Salah's got 2 years left maybe on his, depends what his contract situation is, but if they were to bring in someone to replace him, I think we'd be looking for someone who's quite young, who might be in that same gap, kind of age gap he was in, so like 23, 21, 23, something like that. Who would you pick?
So I just want to talk through my logic of who I've picked, because we've already talked a lot about how...
There better not be non-players.
It's not non-players, I promise you. We've talked a lot about how Alexander-Arnold has been inverting Liverpool, sort of forming this box midfield. But when you invert your fullback, obviously you're removing a player from the wide channel, and then the question is, how are you going to provide width on that side? So usually what happens when teams do this is that they'll have touchline hugging wingers who can drop in and receive the ball. So we've seen, I guess, Riyad Mahrez is a good example at Man City. This raises questions about the way that Salah's been used recently with the inversion happening. This obviously offers really nice access into the wide play, but he has to drop in to receive the ball, often back to goal, and you have to be able to then manipulate fullbacks in those scenarios where you might not usually. And Mohamed Salah is someone who's almost played as an auxiliary striker a lot in previous seasons. So he's often been doing the other action, right, which is running in behind, receiving the ball into feet and scoring in that way. So I think we've definitely seen a drop-off in Salah's production in the last few seasons because of Alexander-Arnold. And the big question for me for this was, if Liverpool are going to continue playing in this way, and again, we've got the caveat of it depends on the manager's going to be, should they replace Salah then with a profile that better fits being able to play as a width provider? Liverpool have plenty of dangerous goal scorers now. They've got Darwin Núñez, who I think gets into dangerous goal scoring positions. We could debate whether or not we think he's efficient enough to rely on him as a goal scorer. But we've got Diaz as well, and then the cheat code finisher in Diogo Jota. Should it be the case then that Liverpool look for a completely different profile for Salah, so that he can fit into this sort of system?
I don't know, John. What is the answer?
Well, I think the answer is yes. And the player that I've chosen is Michael Elise at Crystal Palace. I think Elise is a fun player, and he fills a lot of the things that we're talking about. He's young, 22 years old. He is going to make a big move soon. If you're getting rid of someone like Salah, you can afford to spend money on a player like him. He offers like that wide option. I think he's a two-way winger. He can go either way past. He
can play in the middle defenders as well.
Yeah, and he's been playing in this sort of position for a team like Palace, where he is going to often have to drop in to receive the ball anyway.
I think Elise is actually probably the perfect pick. I'd imagine lots of clubs would all be looking at him, because he's one of the few, like the age he's at and where he can definitely go upwards from there. There's very few that are as good. I think he's got 5 goals this season already playing Palace. He's got 7 starts. And he can hit free kicks in 25 yards as well. The boy's amazing.
And he's a shot-creating actioner. So he's, I think, 3rd in the Premier League. He has 5.85 goal creating actions per 90 this season, which is just ahead of Bukayo Saka, for example, right? So we're talking then about not only changing the profile, but shifting the responsibility for scoring onto his teammates in the front line, and saying if he can, generate more goals than Salah was from a wider position, then you're sort of justifying that as well. But what about you? What are you thinking for this position?
Well, I think also Michael Olise now. I've seen that you said that, and I didn't think of him before. Don't know why I suggest him for other teams. What I do think might be interesting is if it's right now, say Salah decides to leave in the summer or something like that, you never know. The most sensible option for me would be Rafinha, because you get real goal scoring, chance creation, dribbles both sides. Just a great option for any manager who wants to have a left-footed right winger, basically, is what I thought. My thought were there. And maybe a longer-term one. I still think it's Olise, but Rooney Bardsky is one of these young, like high-ceiling potential players you could get in and coach to be the next kind of level. That also could be said of Ben Doak, though. Doak's just not getting the minutes and he's been injured, so it could be that Doak becomes a really high-level player. But Bardsky is more of the player who comes inside in the middle, like Salah does, and is already creating things and scoring goals at like Champions League level. So that would be my possible future, but I would say Rafinha right now, that would be the option, would be my sensible transfer. But long term, it's Michael Olise. Well, we've solved it. Now we're going to look at who could be the next centre-back, the star of the Premier League, because Virgil van Dijk also won't play forever. They could do with cover either side of the centre-backs, because at the moment, as you can see, they've got Konate. Once is coming through as a young player. Maybe he could be Joe Gomez can play all over the place here. But this could be a weakness of theirs where they could definitely improve. Please tell me, John, who your sensible transfer for Liverpool at centre-back would be. So
I've gone for Alessandro Bastoni, who is at Inter. The reason I've gone for him is I'm thinking longer term and with the manager in mind. I think Bastoni offers just a ton of upside for any manager coming in. So if a manager comes in and wants to play a back three, he can play on the outside of that back three. If you want to play with a back four, he's comfortable playing on the left side of a back four. He is left-footed. He's 24 years old. He's I think just a brilliant progressor of the ball, carries the ball super well, better than Van Dijk, I think. Maybe a little bit less good on the ball than Van Dijk, but also still very good and actually puts up more progressive passes than Van Dijk in the system that Inter have at the moment. So the reason I've gone for him, as I say, is because I feel as though you could buy him right now, and whoever comes in is going to be like, fantastic, I've got Alessandro Bastoni as an option. He's just going to be a starter for the next 10 years.
It does make a lot of sense, yeah. Bastoni's, I think you put down as a backup like Edmund Tapsoba, he'd be great as well, jumping into things. And I think the problem with replacing Van Dijk is that there's no one really like him in the entire world as a defender who is both massive but also really, really good on the ball, like playing the long diagonals that they always play. Like this sort of thing. Whee! So that's the kind of thing you want to have. Now, I've put down as suggestions, I couldn't really narrow it down to one. Liverpool have been linked with Gonzalo Inácio, who plays on the left side of Sporting's back three, and he likes to play long passes forward. They're mostly kind of straight over the top ones rather than diagonals. So maybe him as an option. There's options we've had for other clubs that would make sense to me, like Antonio Silva or something like that. Maybe you put in, but his international teammate Van Dijk's and Matthijs de Ligt, I think, would be like the outstanding candidate. He's just a big centre back who would suit any kind of manager's style of play. So you put someone in who's got good positioning, good passing, they can carry the ball, is a big presence in the back line, and has played in like Germany and Italy at the highest level. And that makes sense to me as like the kind of elite level player they'd need to bring in if they're going forward. And so that's, I know I've said him before, but it's kind of a good one.
Yeah, agreed. And like I say, it fits that potential future manager isn't going to care. He's going to be like, great, I've got Matthijs de Ligt.
Well, let's see John's full sensible transferred team.
So I don't have a central midfield option. There's nothing there. So yeah, play with one player down. But Liverpool play quite well.
With 10 men,
yeah, exactly. So this could work out well for them. Salah is being replaced by Olise. He's the long-term Salah replacement. And then we've got Bastoni kicking out Van Dijk. Going to sit there in the left centre-back spot.
I like it, especially the 10 men, which might help me win this week in the comments. So whose team's better? I'm going to put in Rafinha. I really want Olise as well, but I'll put Rafinha in to make it more interesting. Then I'll also put in Cheikh Doucouré, because why not? That'd be fun. And then I'll also put in who I said at centre-back. And that person I said was Matthijs de Ligt in for Van Dijk. And that is my much better starting 11. We've solved it, or have we? Let us know in the comments. Now we're going to look at wildcards, and specifically from this Atheltic article telling us who all potential candidates are to replace Jurgen Klopp at Liverpool. Who is the wildest? Who would you pick?
Well, I'm not going to go for a wild option here, to be honest. I think that Liverpool are in an interesting situation because they play quite a unique style of football. So I think that a lot of the candidates that are coming in are going to be playing a different style of football to the style of football that Jurgen Klopp has been playing. So the big question is how do you make that transition without it being too much of an issue? And I think...
Do you think it should be similar to what he's doing, or would you go different?
I think Liverpool Football Club need to decide what are we doing in the future, play style wise, and then make the decision of manager on the basis of that. In that vein, I think Julian Nagelsmann is probably the best option for Liverpool because Julian Nagelsmann has played in a number of different play styles. He's played Red Bull style football, so he has the ability to play that intense gegenpressing football, but he's also played the sort of high positional play that you might expect from a coach like Pep Guardiola. If Liverpool want to start shifting towards a more standard elite model, then Julian Nagelsmann will be the person to do that. If he finds out that it's not going to work with the players they've got, he can still fall back on this more intense style as well. So for me, Nagelsmann is maybe the safe option here.
Do you know, it's kind of this thing with Liverpool that the manager, the ones that seem to capture the team are the ones that capture the way the city works, the way the club works, and so that's why one of the reasons Jurgen Klopp has worked so well, because he translates what's come through the stands onto there. I know it sounds, there's this thing I always talk about teams like Liverpool, that's what they do, but it's very unrealistic, and I don't think he'd leave Tottenham, but Ange Postecoglou, it would be fantastic. So I think what should happen now is not Postecoglou coming in, but if you were to take, say for example, Xabi Alonso or De Zerbi, put them in there at that level and let them have a year and a half, and it probably, because Alonso's football is quite different to what Liverpool or what Klopp's doing, so it might not work exactly, and the end of an era will always make things difficult anyway. So whoever comes in is going to struggle, I would think. They would still play well because they were great players, right? They wouldn't be exactly the same. So you put someone else in to give it to Moyes. Give it to Moyes for 7 months, and then see when Ange Postecoglou would go, because he supported them when he was young, right? And I know he wouldn't leave Spurs because he's a loyal boy, but he couldn't turn down that job. And they would play such nice football. It would resonate with the fans. He would be exactly the kind of a manager that I think fans would enjoy managing their team. It's impossible to replace Klopp straight after him, but he would be the closest to it. In a dream world, that would be what they do. Sorry, Tottenham fans, but I think that's what the actual perfect thing to do would be. I'm going to go into hiding now.
That's definitely the wildest of cards.
Yeah. But I am a wild boy, and we are wild
people.
And
wild folk.
Yes, and this is Sensible Transfers. Was it wild enough for you? Let us know in the comments. And we'll see you in the summer, I think. Goodbye. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Atheltic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and Rafa Honigstein. With the latest transfer news and insight on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.